Welcome to Excel Basics video number 6. Now, last video we talked about the if function. Very common function, solves a lot of problems. But in this video, we got to talk about something just as common, lookup. We want to be able to do any Excel lookup task with XLOOKUP, lookup, filter, switch, and XMATCH. All are lookup functions. If we go over to the sheet functions, when XLOOKUP was released in 2019, it replaced older functions like VLOOKUP, index, and others. And it does so many things. We can look up a value from a cell, look up a column, look up a row, do exact match or next smaller, binary search, and much more. Now, XLOOKUP does do most of the lookup tasks we need, but there are a few other tasks that it doesn't do. Filter, XMatch, lookup, and switch will do those other lookups that XLOOKUP can't do. Now, there's two other good lookup functions that we won't see in this video, index and choose. But together, all of these functions, you can do any lookup task that you want. Now, let's go over to the sheet topics. Here are the topics, and we're going to start it off with AI. Yeah, over on this sheet, AI. Now, asking AI questions to help you build an Excel model is good. Sometimes it gives you a good answer, but sometimes it gives you a terribly inefficient or the completely wrong answer. So my job as a teacher here at YouTube is to teach you the foundation of Excel, how to build efficient models so you can use AI and know when the answer is a good one or it's not a good one. Now, let's imagine we're a new teacher who wants to use Excel. We might ask a question like this about grading. I would like an Excel formula to assign an A+ to the grade of 95% or higher, an A grade to less than 95 and greater than or equal to 90, and so on. This is a perfectly good question that says exactly what I want. Now, this is a text box. I'm going to highlight, copy, and I'm going to go over to ChatGPT, Control-V, and Enter. And guess what? AI always gives you an answer. And what is this? This is like last video, if and ifs. The problem with this formula is that it is much too complicated. And they hard-coded all the values into the formula. Not only that, but if the person didn't know that 95 as a whole number will not work if you actually have decimals or percentages, this is just not going to work. In Gemini, Control-V and Enter. And here they give you a nested if. Same problem, too complicated, hard-coded values, and that 95 as a whole number may cause problems. If we come back over to our workbook, AI and if. Here is one of the formulas I got one of the times I asked this question. Again, too complicated. Everything's hard-coded. At least this time they gave me percentages. They also gave me this nested if. Now, here's the wonderful thing about Microsoft 365. Well, we have XLOOKUP. Much better, much easier to build the table and use a lookup formula. Not only that, but every single version of Excel back to VisiCalc 1 in 1979 actually had the best and most efficient solution, and that's the lookup function. And we'll talk about why when we're doing approximate match lookup or lookup exact or next smaller, oftentimes it's much better to use this older function than XLOOKUP. All right, let's go over to the sheet, and we're going to start talking about XLOOKUP. Now, here are the arguments and a description. And in fact, we've already used the XLOOKUP a few times to do approximate match or exact match next smaller and exact match. We even used if not found last video when we were building an invoice. But we're going to look at this function in much more detail in this video. There's the lookup value that it tries to find a match in the lookup array range Once it finds the position, then it goes to return array, brings the value from that position from the return array back to the cell or the formula. That's a message or some value. If an A error occurs, match mode, we've seen exact match by default and -1 for exact match or next smaller. We'll see some of these other options. And for search mode, we'll get to see some of these options. Now let's go over to EM for exact match. Now, we have already covered this, but just to cover all bases, this is how it works. Here's a formula right here. It takes quad, and it searches through this range. When it finds quad, it says 1, 2, 3. It remembers that 3, jumps over to the range where it's going to retrieve the value. 1, 2, 3. It finds 43.95, and it brings that value back. Now, as we recall when we first saw this formula, if this is QUAD and this is QUAD, no problem, they match, even if the case isn't right. But if there's an extra space, it's not going to make a match. Now let's go look at an example on EM for exact match. Now here's our lookup situation. We want to look up a product name, find a match, and bring back a price. So equals XL tab. There's lookup value. We're going to look up quad, comma, lookup array. Those are the values where we're going to look through and get a match to determine the position. Now this is an Excel table, so I can point, and when I see my downward pointing black arrow, I click. It puts the table name and the field name in square brackets in. That's the column reference. Comma, return array. That's the price column. Click. It'll find a match, get a value from this column, and bring it back to the cell. Now, comma, I don't need a message for not if found. Match mode, exact match 0 is the default. So I'm going to backspace, backspace, and close parentheses. NA. Well, yeah, the formula is being polite. It says not available. That politeness is letting you know there's a problem. Well, sure enough, there's a space. Backspace, and now it works. Now, rather than letting someone type and misspell or add spaces, we can do data validation to add a drop-down list that points to the product column and only allows values from this column. Now, we almost always want to do this when we're doing exact match because we usually have the lookup table right here or on a different sheet. Now, we're going to click in that cell, over to data tools, and there it is. Drop down, data validation. And here's the amazing data validation dialog box. Now, we want to allow any value. That's the default, so all cells come with that default. But this does so many things. You can say whole number and put a min and max, and it limits the inputs to just that. You can do it for decimals, dates, times, text length. You can even create a logical formula in custom. But we want the most amazing one, list. There's our source. Click on product. It doesn't put table formula nomenclature in, but that range will expand because this is an Excel table if we add new records. Well, before we click OK, input message means you could type something here, and when you first click the cell, it'll pop up with this message. We can type an error alert, something like use drop-down arrow. I'll put it here too. Click OK. And there's our beautiful drop-down. I can select Aspen, and just like that, it found Aspen, got the 26.95, and brought it back. Now, here's another cool thing. If I type the letter Q, there it is in gray. I can hit Tab. Now, before we had XLOOKUP, we almost always used for exact match with a false or 0 there, VLOOKUP. But notice we had to put the column number in. Now, there was a dynamic way to do it, so we wouldn't run into the error I'm going to show you. But almost nobody did that dynamic version. They just typed a 3 in. And watch what happens if I insert a column. Insert. Well, that's looking at column 3, which is this one, and properly returning a 0. But what did XLOOKUP do to solve that problem? Well, there's just two columns. Insert some columns, and there's still two columns. So we get the correct answer. Escape. Control Z. And so we can use XLOOKUP exact match to get something from a lookup table and bring it back to the cell. Now, two of the more amazing things that XLOOKUP made it really easy to do, that is look up a record and look up a column. Now let's go to record. Now here's the situation. We need to look up employee ID, find a match, and return the whole record. Now, even when I create a formula 5 years after this XLOOKUP came out, I am still excited because it's so easy to look up a record. Hey, there's the lookup value, comma, and the key for lookup array, 1, 2, 3, 4 rows, comma, and in return array, there has to be 4 rows. But it can be 4 rows with 1 column, 2, 3, however many you want. And because there's 4 rows, when we get a match, I put in 5 columns, so it's going to return every single value for that record from each column. This is exact match, so we don't need any of the other arguments, close parentheses, and that is simply amazing. Now, here's how we used to do it. We'd either use VLOOKUP, and in column index, we create this number incrementer, which would increment the number. Or we'd use index and match. In index function, it needs a row number. Match would deliver the row number, and a second match would deliver the column number. So as you can see, that's pretty exciting. When you're looking up records, XLOOKUP rules. Now, similarly, looking up a column was difficult, but not anymore, not with XLOOKUP. Now, the goal here is to look up day, find a match in this horizontal row that contains 1, 2, 3, 4 columns, and then return the entire sales for the particular hours and add. That means we need to look up a column equals XLOOKUP. I'm looking up day, comma, and notice 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. That's in lookup array, comma. Return array must have 4 columns, but it can have as many rows as you want. And when it finds a match 1, 2, 3, 4 column, it just returns all the rows. Now when I close parentheses, this is exact match, so we don't need the rest of those arguments. That's not going to work because it's going to spill. But watch this. I'm going to move it with my move cursor just so we can see. Bam! We looked up an entire column. If I change this to day 3, just like that, it looked up a column. Control Z, Z, F2. The goal is to add, so we put that beautiful column that's being delivered by XLOOKUP right into sum. Control Enter, and there we go. Day 1 total, $10,006. This is how we used to do it. And it wasn't so complicated, but you did have to remember in row number to leave it empty or put a 0. That means get all the rows, and then match had to determine whatever the column number. But I'm afraid looking up a column or a row, XLOOKUP just makes it easy. All right, let's go to our next example. We want to look at exact match or next smaller. All right, here's a great example of when we're going to need to use exact match or next smaller lookup. If we have weekly earnings and we need to look up a tax rate, well, weekly earnings could be any number, 0 to 5,000, let's say. Well, we can't have an exact match column with every single value. So we have these categories. So for 600, that match value right there represents every possible weekly earnings number between 600 and 999 and 99 pennies. So we'll do an exact match or next smaller lookup. We take the value, look through the column. We can't find an exact match, but there's the next smaller. It's in the 4th position. We jump over to the tax rate column. In position 4, we take 10% and bring it back. Now, there are certain characteristics for tax tables, commission tables, sales discount tables. And those characteristics are, it comes as a table. The first column is sorted A to Z, smallest to biggest, and there are no duplicates. Now, even though this is almost always how we get these types of tables when we're doing exact match or next smaller lookup, if you're using XLOOKUP, this first column does not have to be sorted. However, as we will see, since almost every type of lookup table like this that you will ever get is already sorted smallest to biggest, there's an alternative using the lookup function that's much better. Now, let's go look at how to do both XLOOKUP and then lookup on next smaller 2. All right, for this example, we're going to do earnings, look it up in a tax table. We're going to try and look up $1,000, and we're going to see a couple different formulas. Let's start off with XLOOKUP, XL tab. There's the lookup value, comma, lookup array. We're going to try and find a match here. Exact match or next smaller. Notice it is sorted, but it doesn't need to be. Comma, return array. There's the taxes. Comma. For not found, we're probably not going to have anything except for 0 to above 5,000, which means we cover everything. But maybe there's a credit, some refund. And down here you can see if there were negative possibilities, we could put either a message or probably better a 0. So in if not found, I'm going to put 0 because, of course, the tax rate would be 0, comma, match mode. We want -1 for exact match or next smaller, and close parentheses. Control Enter, and sure enough, it found an exact match and returned the correct rate. If I put 1,200, well, it still found the next smaller, 10%, brought it back, 3,000. And now it looked up the next smaller, 15%, and brought it back. Now I'm going to Control Z. Because this is XLOOKUP, if we had a crazy table like this, I'm going to use my move cursor. That is not sorted, and it had no problem because it's XLOOKUP. Control Z. Also, if this column was somewhere way over here, not part of the lookup table, well, the formula still works. Control Z. However, even though XLOOKUP can do those fancy things like have the tax rate off to the side and sort in a crazy way, that's just not the way these types of lookup tables come. And since most tables are in a table format, no duplicates in the first row, and they're sorted smallest to biggest, the best alternative for this type of lookup is the lookup function. If we go over to the sheet lookup, here's the function. And you won't believe this, it's the very first lookup function created all the way back in the first spreadsheet, even before Excel, VisiCalc, back in 1979. That means one of the original functions still has a really awesome use. Now, there's 2 different ways to use this function. And we're just going to use it when we get tax and discount tables. And all we're going to have to do is put in the lookup value and the tax table, and that's it. It does the rest. That means the 2 advantages to lookup are we only have to enter 2 arguments instead of 5 or 6 arguments into the XLOOKUP. And second, and even more important, it calculates much faster than XLOOKUP. And the way it does that is with a binary search. If we go over to how BS binary search works, it actually takes a lookup table, and instead of checking every single one, it alternatively splits the table, checks the value against the lookup value. In this case, since it's bigger, it takes this half and then repeats, and then finally gets a lookup value. This binary search is a technique going all the way back to the beginning of databasing. And it is lightning fast when you have either a big data set with lots of lookup formulas or a very large lookup table. All right, so let's go see how to do lookup. Here we're going to look up 1,000 equals lookup tab. we're going to use the second option, lookup value, comma, and the table. Now again, when you use lookup, this column has to be sorted smallest to biggest, and the value you're trying to retrieve has to be the last column. But again, since our tables already come like this, and even if the tax rate is this column, you just don't highlight the last column. I like entering the 2 arguments instead of 5, and as we'll see with timing results, it's much faster. Now there is a binary option inside of XLOOKUP. If I do all of the arguments I did up here, but now go to the 6th argument, comma, search mode, I can use binary search sorted in ascending order. So I'll use 2. Close parentheses. There's 2 problems. One is it's not as fast at calculating as lookup. And if for some reason there was a duplicate in this column, which I've never seen, but if we did have a duplicate, it's going to return a different value than the original lookup function. Now, there is a way to get XLOOKUP to do exactly the type of lookup that lookup does. We would have to enter all these arguments and enter search last to first, so we put -1. This is a terrible option, even though we can see when there's duplicate, it returns the same thing as lookup. And the reason why is this will blow up your computer if you have a big data set. It just takes too long to calculate. If we go over to the sheet XLOOKUP timing, we can see lookup with a binary search takes 216 milliseconds. If we use the function that gets the same value as lookup, even when there's duplicates, that's an 11,000% increase in calculation time. XLOOKUP's binary search, well, that's a 72% increase over just lookup. If you would like to see why we get different values, you can go to the sheet Excel and Lookup algorithm. This is also in the PDF notes, and it steps through each step and shows why they get different values. The bottom line is I'm using lookup because it's easier to create, and if we have large data sets, it calculates most quickly. If you always have a small data set, it's fine to use either one of these. Don't ever use this one. All right, now we want to go look at some more amazing things that XLOOKUP can do. Let's go over to V or H. Now, XLOOKUP can use V vertical or H horizontal lookup tables. There's vertical, there's horizontal. And our goal is to look up the product price. Hey, we're going to look up Aspen in this vertical lookup table. There's lookup array, comma, return array. And this is exact match, so we don't need anything else. Control Enter. For horizontal equals, well, we're going to use XLOOKUP. There's Aspen. We want to look it up. Oh, this is horizontal. As long as there are just as many columns in lookup array, comma, as return array, it doesn't matter if they're both horizontal or both vertical. Control Enter. And if we change to Carlota, just like that, they're both working. Before we had XLOOKUP, we had VLOOKUP, V for vertical when we did vertical lookup, and H for when we had a horizontal lookup table. Let's go look at another great example, next bigger. All right, here's a situation where we need to look up a pipe size based on land square footage. And the way this works is for 3,500 or less, 3 inches will work. But as soon as you get above this, 3,501, all the way up to 14,000, including 14,000, you got to jump up to 5 inch. Here are the categories. Now, in the old days, we'd have to use index and match function, and the table had to be sorted biggest to smallest. But as we'll see for XLOOKUP, it doesn't matter. XLOOKUP, we're looking this up, comma, lookup array, comma, return array, comma, and we'll come back to that in just a moment, comma, match mode, and we want exact match or next larger. So we put 1 and close parentheses, Control Enter. And sure enough, did we get the correct pipe? And sure enough, we did get the correct pipe. Now, wait a second. How do these show inches? I got to show you a great trick here. We're going to select that cell and use custom number formatting. Control 1. Come down to custom. Instead of general, I want 0. And then in double quotes, I can display text without actually having it in the cell. Double quote, and I'm going to put a space, and I'm going to use a single apostrophe, and then another single apostrophe, and then an actual double quote. And we can see right here, there's the sample. Click OK. Now, here's the old school match with a -1, but it had to be sorted this way. If I sort smallest to biggest, right-click sort, A to Z. Well, that works just fine. This is not available. That's a big improvement. Control Z. Now, let's try and enter a value bigger than 238,000, 240,000. And of course, we get an NA because we do not have a pipe that's big enough to accommodate that land square footage. Now, Control Z, what we're going to do, F2, is create a custom message in if not found. In double quotes, enter a value equal to, in double quote, and join it to the biggest value from the lookup table, ampersand, or less, end double quote. So if not found, we'll now deliver a polite message. Now, the other thing we could have done, as we talked about earlier, if you wanted to limit what goes into this cell, then you could put whole number, 0 to 2,238. We're going to leave this message. All right, let's go look at the next great XLOOKUP example, wild. Now, on this sheet, I'm getting an NA error because F2, I'm asking XLOOKUP to look up COCA doing exact match and find a match in this column. Well, it can't find an exact match, but if we want to do a wildcard lookup, we can get XLOOKUP to find anything that contains COCA. And the way we do it is we use wildcards. Asterisks represent 0 or more characters, and a question mark represents a single wildcard character. So we come before B7, and I need to have an asterisk before and after so that XLOOKUP will look up COCA or any text, one or more characters before and after. And I need to join that asterisk to the cell B7. So in double quotes, asterisk, end double quote, and then the join operator, ampersand. Right now, that just means find COCA or COCA with any text before. We have to do the same thing at the end. And now it'll find COCA or COCA with anything before or after. We come to the end, comma, comma, and in match mode, that's where we use 2 for wildcard. Control Enter. And sure enough, it found a match. If I type RC, it found KC. Control Z. Now, I never use wildcards, either in the old days with VLOOKUP or now with XLOOKUP. And the reason why is because it's not 100% sure you're going to get the match you want. Now, in some cases, if you're sure about the content here, this is the only one that's going to get RC, and this is the only one that's going to get COCA. So if you use it that way, it's OK. But if you ask to find COLA, well, there's 3 matches. It's doing exact match, and it's searching from the top to the bottom. So when there are duplicates, it can only find the first one. Control Enter. It obeyed. It found Atlanta. All right, I'm going to Control Z. Now, wildcards, if you're careful, you can use them. All right, our next topic, we want to go over to the sheet first. All right, before we look at the examples in the Excel workbook, let's go to page 6 in the PDF notes. Here's XLOOKUP. Search mode argument gives us the option to search from first to last or last to first. Now, first to last is the default. And if there are no duplicates in the lookup array, both of these will give you the exact same result. If we go to the next page, we have no duplicates in the product column. So if we do exact match lookup with the default searching first to last, when we look up Carlota, well, it finds the match, gets 32, and brings it back. There are no duplicates here. And when we put -1 in the last argument to look from last to first, well, it starts at the bottom. It finds Carlota. There's no duplicate, so it gets 32. And that's the same for exact match next smaller and exact match next larger. It's only if we go down to the next page when we have duplicates that last to first and first to last will have a difference. Here we have lots of duplicates, and we want to find Sue's first sale. Well, the default for exact match lookup is from first to last. So when we look up Sue, it finds it no problem, the first one. If we do the same formula looking up Sue but put -1 in the last argument, then it starts at the bottom, finds Sue, and brings back the last sale. Now, both of these tables have a certain order. That means they're sorted by date. If we decide to use the same exact match lookup starting at the top and going down, but we decide to sort the table based on sales, what does the function do? It looks up Sue. It finds the first one, because that's all it can do when they're duplicates, and brings back the value. So you have to be aware of the sort when you're using first to last or last to first. All right, on the sheet first, we have a schedule here with employee names. And we need to look up the first date worked. Well, we put an X on the days that they worked. So for Chin, we have the first day as 10/6. Well, since there's duplicates, we can use exact match lookup and look up an X. Lookup value, I'm going to hard code it right into the formula, double quotes in an X, comma, lookup array, a relative range of cells right next to the employee's name. So it moves as we copy the formula down, comma, return array, those are the dates. Now, this cannot move as we copy it down, so we hit the F4 key. Exact match is the default for match mode, and first to last is the default for search. So close parentheses, that's our formula. Control Enter, double click and send it down. Go to the last cell and hit F2. And sure enough, the relative range and absolute range are working. Now let's go over to last. And this is the example we just talked about in the PDF notes. We need to look up Sue and Chin and get their last sale amount. Equals XLOOKUP. We're going to fill both answers, so I'll highlight both employee names. Lookup array. There are lots of duplicates here, and we want the last, comma. Return array, sales column, comma, comma. Exact matches the default since we're looking up the names, and there's lots of duplicates, comma, and we want last to first. So we put -1, close parentheses, and when I Control Enter, we have looked up the last sale for each sales rep. Now, our next example, we want to see what to do when we have two different lookup values. Now, in this lookup table, we have a different price for each city. So Quad, Aspen, Carlota, a particular price for Oakland, and then the same three boomerangs for Seattle and Tacoma have different prices. That means we need some unique identifier to identify the row to get the price. Well, no problem, equals XLOOKUP. If we put Seattle and ampersand to join Quad together, if we click and highlight, we can see Seattle and Quad are now one item, comma. Well, if we have two items that are now one item, we need to do the same thing in lookup array. Store and then join with product. And we can highlight and see, sure enough, we have a single column with two items joined. Now we come to the end, comma. We want to look up the price. This is exact match, so close parentheses, and that's our formula. If I change from Seattle to Oakland, we get a different price. Here's the old school formula using index and match. Now, let's go look at our last XLOOKUP example. two-way lookup. All right, here's a typical two-way lookup table straight from the IRS. We want to look up the Fed tax deduction for an employee's paycheck, and we have gross pay and allowances. Now, the thing about this table is there's lots of different IRS tables like this when you do payroll. This one is just for single person, weekly payroll. But if we look up gross pay of $705 for the week, we find exact match or next smaller, so it's that row. To allowances, we look through here, we find the 2, and that intersecting value is what we want. Now, in order to do a two-way lookup with XLOOKUP, you have to either look up the whole column first and then look up the row, or look up the whole row, deliver that, and then from the row, look up the column. Let's try column first equals XLOOKUP. We're going to look up allowances. That's the lookup value, comma, lookup array. We have 8 columns, comma, and return array has to have 8 columns, but it can have as many rows as we want. Now I have a bunch of rows hidden between 11 and 32 because this is a very tall table. 8 columns, however many rows we want. This is exact match lookup, so we don't need any of the remaining arguments. Close parentheses, Control Enter. We get a spill error because this is a very tall column. If we pull it off to the side, there are all of the internal values. That's the payroll tax we're trying to get. And sure enough, 45 is one of them. This is going to be return array in the next XLOOKUP we use. Control Z, F2, XLOOKUP. Now the lookup value is going to be gross pay, comma, lookup array. We're looking it up here, comma, and we already have return array. Now this is exact match or next smaller, so we come to the end, comma, comma, and -1. Close parentheses, Control Enter, and bam, there's a two-way lookup using 2 XLOOKUP functions. If we change this to 6 and enter, sure enough, it got the right intersecting value, 0. And it got the right intersecting value. Now I just copied and pasted some values I had below. This lookup actually looks up the row first and then gets the column. Also old school, we used to use VLOOKUP and match together or index match match. Now, the truth about XLOOKUP is it can do so many amazing things. We saw how to do two-way lookup, 2 lookup values, look up the last, look up the first, wildcard, next bigger, next smaller, and exact match. All right, now we want to switch gears and look at just a few other lookup functions that can do things that XLOOKUP cannot do. Let's go over to duplicates. Now on this sheet, we want to extract student class records based on whatever's in this cell. Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4 different matching values. And this is a famous Excel task, which was so hard to do before the lookup function we're going to see in this example, filter function. And people would always ask at forums, how do you use one lookup value right there and return multiple items or records? Now, all the way back in 2012, I wrote a whole book about these crazy formulas. And this was one formula we used all the time, but no more. It's as easy as using the filter function. Equals filter tab. And in the array, we put the records that we want to retrieve. I don't need the first column names. And comma, include. This is where we do a Boolean logical test or an array logical test, as we saw in video 5 and number 2. And we're going to do a simple logical test. We're just going to ask the whole column how many of you are equal to, using the comparative operator equal sign, how many of you are equal to Chantel Mims. Now, we are doing a single condition logical test, but we learned that there are and or and many other types of array or Boolean logical tests. whatever series of trues and falses that have the same dimension as the table can be used right there to go and get matches and bring back whatever the records are. You could even have a single column here if you wanted. But that is our formula. Control Enter. I still am amazed because for so many years I had to work hard to get this formula to work. But now the lookup function filter to solve the problem of all lookup functions that what do they do when they have duplicates? They only take the first or the last. But not filter, it will go and get all the records. All right, so filter. Now the next lookup function we want to look at is XMATCH. Now the XMATCH function has arguments similar to XLOOKUP, except there's the lookup value, lookup array, match mode, and search mode. What happened to return array? Well, it doesn't need it because XMATCH will report the relative position of an item in the list. So in lookup value, if we're looking up quad, and in lookup array, we have this array, it's going to say, hey, 1, 2, I found it in the second position, and it will report 2. Now, we don't use the XMatch function as much as we used to. We used to use the old match function inside of index. But we don't use index and match as often anymore because we have XLOOKUP. But there is a great use for XMatch. And we want to go over to the sheet Compare Lists. Now, here's the situation. We have a list of people who went to Sunday's event and who went to Saturday's event. And we need to know who went to both events. I can see Miki did not go to both, but Gigi did. And Gigi is in the second position. Now, there's two parts to a formula that checks two lists. The first part is XMatch. We're going to look up all of these names, comma, and we're going to look them up over here. Now, right now, for Miki, Miki's not over here. So what do lookup functions do when they can't find a match? It'll give us an NA. And what is it going to do when it gets to Gigi? Well, it's going to go 1, 2. I found Gigi in the second position. Now, XMatch uses exact matches default and search from first to last. So all we have to do is close parentheses. And when I Control Enter, I get NAs and numbers. And it is a number that indicates that an item is in both lists. When you see an NA, that means I did not find it in both lists. So to get a true or false, since we're interested in numbers, is number. Close parentheses. This logical function will just say true when it finds a number. Everything else is false. Now down here we have the same list, but we want to find out not who is in both, but we want to find out who only went to Sunday. Now I'm going to change the column width up here. And guess what? It's the same formula equals XMatch. We'll look up all of these names, comma, within this list over here, close parentheses, Control Enter. But now we're not interested in numbers. We're interested in NA. Yes, I looked something up from the Sunday list, but it wasn't over there. That means only Sunday, F2. And instead of is number, is NA. Close parentheses at the end, Control Enter. And now we get 1, 2, 3 trues. Miki, Kip, and Fran only went to Sunday's event. Now the way you remember this is we always use XMatch as the base. Both, that's is number. Only in one, the one with the lookup value, that's is NA. All right, let's go look at our last function, switch. Now, you're not going to believe what the lookup function switch can do. Switch function's superpower is that it can look up anything. Numbers, text values, formulas, tables, cell references, ranges, arrays, and more. Yeah, it is the Swiss Army knife of lookup. And here are the arguments. We have an expression, which for us will be a lookup value. And then that expression is matched against value 1, value 2, value 3, and so on. If there's a match for value 1, then it takes result 1. And remember, that could be anything, a lookup table, a formula, text. If expression matches value 2, then it takes result 2, and so on. For us, we're going to look up a table. And the table we're going to deliver by switch is going to be used inside the lookup function lookup. That way, lookup has the choice between different lookup tables, which is sometimes the case when you have lookup. It's not always the case that you have just a single lookup table. All right, let's go over to the sheet table. All right, here's the situation. We have some products, and we need to look up units. But Bellin, Aspen, and Quad each have their own lookup table. So we'll build the formula with switch and see, at least for this row, that it gets the right table amongst 1, 2, 3 tables. Equals switch. Expression as a relative cell reference, whatever is in the row under the product field, comma. Value 2 is going to be right here. And I'm going to F4 because we're going to have to copy this. And that needs to be locked, comma. The result, well, it's the lookup table, F4, comma. Now notice it says default or value. We have another value in result, so we click on quad, F4, and then put in quad's table, F4, comma. Now, we only have one table left, so that becomes the default. That's for all other boomerangs besides quad and Bellin. So I simply highlight the table, F4. That's going to be the default. Close parentheses, Control Enter. And of course, it spills because it's a table. But let's see, Bellin. Sure enough, it got the right table. Now let's copy it down, and we'll get a little bit of a spill error. But for Aspen, we can check. Is that the correct table? Well, it's not Bellin or Quad, so bam, it got the correct default table. If I copy it down one more row, sure enough, it is working. Control Z, Z. Now F2, and this is Approximate Match Lookup, or Exact Match or next smaller, so I'm using lookup. There are the units, comma. That whole thing right there is the array. Close parentheses, Control Enter. Double click and send it down. Go to the last cell in F2. I'm checking to make sure I got all the absolute and relative cell references correct, and I did. Now, if we look at switch, right there, we're matching that against Bellin, and then we're matching B9 against Quad. We could have used the ifs or if. Actually, both of those functions are like Swiss Army knives too. They can return lots of different things. But notice we'd have to build a logical test each time. We avoided building this logical test each time when we used switch. So switch is a little bit shorter and easier to create. Now, the switch example was the last example in this video. And you know what that means? You can go try the homework and practice problems. There are 10 of them, and I even gave you answers to check your work. All right, that was an epic video all about XLOOKUP formulas. We saw the Swiss Army knife of lookup function switch. We saw match to compare two lists. We saw the amazing filter function, which solved the age-old problem. One lookup value, return multiple items. And then we did all those amazing things with the XLOOKUP function. All right, that was Excel Basics number 6. Number 7 is coming up, and that is going to be a summary of formula creation in the worksheet before we move on to data analysis. All right, we'll see you next Excel Basics video.